Hello, 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 everybody. Matthew Johnson here from Direct Language Solutions. I hope you all are having a wonderful day. The weather here, I live in near Flensburg, in the very north of Germany. The weather here is not so fantastic, considering it's supposedly the first official day of spring, or whatever it is they're calling it here. But so I hope the weather is a little more pleasant where you guys are. Today I would like to talk a little bit about some questions that I got, particularly by our YouTube channel, some comments, and also some private messages that I got, people asking about difficult languages. I made a video about 2 weeks ago for our question of the week about the most difficult language to learn. Somebody asked me what is the most difficult language in the world, and as I said in the video, it's very difficult to answer objectively because it depends on a lot of things. It depends on your native language, it depends on what languages you have experience with, also to a degree what you consider to be difficult. And there are a lot of elements of difficulty in language, and of course I cannot answer for the entire world of languages. I'm sure there are languages much more difficult than Russian or Japanese, which were the two languages I said were probably the most difficult for English speakers, according to my experience. But I don't know anything about those languages. I'm not a linguist. I am a language teacher. There's a difference. I do speak a lot of languages. I've experienced with a lot of languages, but I'm not a linguist who makes it his business to know every single thing about every language in the world. It's a very specialized field, and you might ask a linguist. They could probably give you a more detailed answer than I could. But at the same time, I'm speaking from real experience. And that's what I have to offer. I have the experience I have with languages to offer. So, about the questions, the specific questions I got, somebody wrote on as a comment to that video, what about Chinese and Arabic? I'm supposing that he is asking if they're comparatively difficult. I don't I'm not really exactly sure what he's asking, but I'm going to try to kind of extract from the comment and help in the best way that I can. Somebody also wrote me a private message, saying she was a Hungarian speaker. I thought Hungarian was the most difficult language. What about Hungarian? It has more endings than Russian. So also nobody asked about it, but Finnish was brought to my attention. And then I did think of Korean. So I want to talk about those languages, and I want to talk about language difficulty in general. Let me hit that first. What makes a language difficult? A lot of things, and some of these difficulties are not problems for some people, and they're more pronounced problems for others. First of all, you might find pronunciation difficult. It might be difficult for certain people to pronounce certain languages. Well, at least. Some sounds, for example, for us English speakers in Russian are a bit difficult to pronounce. In Hungarian, for that matter. Chinese, certainly. Certainly. Japanese is quite easy to pronounce. Spanish is not very difficult to pronounce either. French, I don't particularly find huge problems in any language that I've spent time with. I don't pronounce any of them perfectly, of course. I'm a native English speaker, so any language I speak, I'm going to speak with an accent. That is the norm. Everybody, as a rule, when they learn a foreign language, they'll speak with at least a slight accent. It's normal. You don't have to imitate a native speaker perfectly. You shouldn't expect that from yourself. It's not a meaningful goal, in my opinion, in the grand scheme of things. Anyway, but if that's what you like to do, go for it. Sound the best you can, but in any case, pronunciation can be difficult for some people in certain languages. So some languages are more difficult to pronounce for certain people, sure. Grammar. Some languages have grammar that is simply more complex than the grammar of other languages. Russian is a very complex grammar compared to that of Chinese or English or Dutch. German has a relatively complex grammar. It's much more complex than English. Some people might find that difficult. Vocabulary is more difficult to learn for some languages. For me, for example, Hungarian vocabulary can be very difficult because it's a very exotic language. For English speakers, or Japanese, people can find that very difficult. German, not so difficult. Spanish, not so difficult. We have a lot of vocabulary in common. So those are some elements of difficulty in a language. There are others, cultural elements, um, that can be very complicated. If someone would like a more detailed video on those things, what makes a language difficult, I would be happy to make a detailed video about that subject. But now I'm going to talk about the specific languages people asked me about and the languages that, yeah, occurred to me. So let's talk about Arabic and Chinese. Arabic. I have never had any experience really whatsoever learning Arabic except for having played with the alphabet a bit. I have no need to learn Arabic right now. I do have an interest maybe one day in learning Arabic, but I see language learning as a functional thing. I actually learn languages that I use and that I sort of need for my life. I live in Germany. I do all of my business in German. Uh, Russian. My social life takes, a lot of it takes place in Russian, and I have ties to Russia. I've spent time in Russia, and then, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. I have uses for my languages. Um, and generally, you know, the more I need a language, the better I actually end up speaking it. That's just what language is. It's a practical tool. So I have no use for Arabic right now. Maybe one day that'll change, and if it does change, I'll take a stab at Arabic. However, about the difficulty, I think for most people it would prove to be a very difficult language. For me, because of my Hebrew, it's certainly not an exotic language. I don't feel that it's very exotic or culturally challenging. The vocabulary, when I hear it, I'm not saying that I understand Arabic when I hear it. Sometimes I can get, some bits, but it sounds fairly familiar. It sounds like if I spent time with it, I could come to grips with it relatively easy compared to, for example, if I wanted to learn something like Finnish or Atayal or something like that. Something that I know nothing about, or well, almost nothing. The writing system doesn't. It's not. It would not be very challenging for me in terms of reading without vowels. Arabic has the problem of reading without. There are no vowels. The vowels are not written. You just see the consonants that the words have, and you have to sort of know the word, know what you're reading, and hear the vowels in your head while you're reading. That can be difficult for a lot of people. For me, because I do that in Hebrew, it's really not a problem. Just for the particular vocabulary in Arabic, I would have to get used to it, but the concept is very familiar to me. Reading from right to left, as one does in Arabic, is totally natural to me because of Hebrew grammar concepts. Because I do read, biblical Hebrew and things like that. I'm familiar with the grammatical concepts, how words are formed, the morphology, more or less. It doesn't seem very mysterious to me. So I think, for me, it would not be so difficult. And from a less, personal perspective, from a more global perspective, I think Arabic is relatively difficult, but it doesn't pose the same barriers as, for example, Japanese or Russian. Russian has a complex grammar, very, very complex. It's a very rich language. It's just Japanese as well. There's just a lot of things that make those languages difficult that Arabic doesn't seem to have from my perspective. But again, I can only answer about languages that I know or that I've spent time with. So I'm sorry, I can't go into much more detail about Arabic. Chinese. Chinese is, of course, relatively difficult for a native English speaker if you compare it to German, Dutch, or Spanish, or something like that, perhaps. But the grammar of Chinese is quite simple. And I know that some people might say, yeah, but there's this and that if you study classical Chinese. Let's get serious. Go study literary Russian. It's another world of grammatical complexity compared to Chinese. The pronunciation can be difficult, but it's just something you have to get used to. Chinese pronunciation just has a bit of a bizarre phenomenon for English speakers, in that whenever you change the tone of a word, in English we change the tone for emphasis and so on and so forth. In Chinese, if you do that, it changes the meaning of words. But it's actually not so serious. From what I understand, Chinese speakers, when they're speaking Mandarin, if Mandarin isn't the dialect that they use in their everyday life, they can sometimes make mistakes in the tones. And it's not so strict, they're not stupid. If they hear a sound with the wrong tone in the context of a sentence, they'll know what you're saying, and I don't think they think about it too much. Especially if they look at you and they say that you have blonde hair and blue eyes. and you speak with an accent anyway, they're not going to think, oh, well, he's a fool. He's not speaking exactly the way I do. He must not be Chinese. I don't think they put that expectation on people. So it's not a problem. The characters are a problem. You have to learn quite a number of them to be able to read Chinese, and appreciate it, I guess. For Japanese, if you know 2000, that's definitely enough to read most things that you would want to read. You should know a few more, of course. And then in Japanese, you have the kana, which that does add a little bit of difficulty to the mix because you have the three working together all the time. They can be a little confusing before you get used to it. Chinese, you just have the Chinese characters. The thing about Chinese is that the characters usually only have one pronunciation, generally restricted range of meanings. Japanese characters, they can have many meanings, many different ways to pronounce them. Japanese people sometimes misread them. When they read them, they pronounce them incorrectly. Not very, very often, but it does happen. For Chinese, it's not a problem. So maybe there are more characters that you have to learn in Chinese, but in the end, it's not so much of a problem as in Japanese. It's not as difficult to deal with the characters as it is in Japanese. So that's Chinese. And of course, there are other elements of Chinese like vocabulary. I would say vocabulary is quite difficult to learn for an English speaker in terms of just remembering it and activating it. Of course, I don't really see language learning as too much of a memory-related activity. I don't think you rely too much on memory, but more habit. But it's just for Chinese, it might be a little bit difficult to learn and internalize new vocabulary. But I think it's comparable to Japanese in that respect, even though Japanese does have some loan words from English, but that's another subject and it can be a little bit tricky in itself. So Chinese, Arabic, sure, they're difficult. From my perspective, they're not as difficult for somebody with my background as Japanese or Arabic. I'm sorry, excuse me, Russian. Hungarian, yes. It is not an Indo-European language, but I'm going to call it a European language because its home, at least its current home, Hungarian proper, is certainly in Europe. Uh, so culturally, Hungarians might have a lot in common with Germans, French people, compared to Japanese people, for example, or Chinese people, or Arabic speakers. But it's quite exotic. It's quite an exotic language. I'm not fluent in Hungarian, but my experience with it, I have the impression it's actually quite an easy language to learn. The vocabulary is a bit of a problem. There are definitely some strange concepts in the grammar, but they're not difficult, in my opinion. They're just a little bit strange. I can go into a video about Hungarian, maybe make a video where I speak Hungarian if you guys would like. But that's all I'm going to say about Hungarian now. It just has some grammatical aspects that are very foreign to native English speakers and native speakers of most other languages. But from my perspective, they're not difficult, and there are a lot of things that other languages have, other difficulties that Hungarian does not have. Hungarian does not have grammatical gender in the sense that German and Russian does, at least, at all. It doesn't. The case inflections, they say Hungarian has, you hear different numbers. It depends on your source, anywhere from 14 to 21 cases. I've heard all kinds of numbers, but in fact, they don't really have grammatical case in the sense that Russian and German do, in a sense that makes the language difficult to learn. Hungarian has basically postpositions. They work like prepositions. They're not true. It's not a true case system from my perspective. I'm not a linguist. I am someone who speaks a lot of languages and teaches languages. And when I say case system, I mean something like what German or Russian has. At least, you could say Hungarian has a case system, but it certainly does not make the language difficult to learn. So that's it. That's all I'm going to say about Hungarian. Finnish. I take it that Finnish is similar to Hungarian. I don't really know much about Finnish at all. I was thinking about spending some time with it, but I have no need for Finnish. I'm sorry, I'm not going to learn Finnish just so that I can entertain people who want to prove that Finnish is a difficult language or anything like that. I can say that it seems that it's not as challenging as Russian or Japanese. It's not as culturally challenging as Japanese, from my perspective. it has a lot of cases apparently, and apparently they do work more or less the way they do in Russian and German. I'm not totally sure, so I can't really answer Finnish. But what I know about it, it does appear to be quite a difficult language. But I think that it does share important cultural traits with European languages. Again, I could be wrong, but I think that to an important degree it does that. So I don't think it would pose quite as big of a problem as Japanese and Russian. One day maybe we'll see. So that's really all I have to say. There are other languages I know in China, well, excuse me, in Taiwan that seem to be very difficult to learn, indigenous languages. I don't know much about them. But I hope this video helped, and if you have any more specific questions, I'd be happy to make a video and attempt to answer them. Have a wonderful day, and be sure to like us on Facebook, check out our website, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got lots of stuff coming for you guys. So, toodaloo now.